In 1994, a film was released based on Alan Bennett's play, The Madness of King George III. To a British audience, it was probably quite obvious who the film was about. But the story goes that if it had been released under that name in other countries, there wouldn't have been many viewers, as they would assume they had missed parts 1 and 2 of the trilogy. So it was entitled The Madness of King George. Today our readings are from the end of Luke's Gospel and the beginning of the book of Acts, its sequel, which we often call Acts of the Apostles. In his Gospel, Luke writes to Theophilus, literally meaning friend of God or loving God, to give an accurate account of events from the foretelling of John the Baptist's birth right through to the death, resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ. And Acts, again addressed to Theophilus, picks up where he left off, beginning with the Ascension, Pentecost and the whirlwind adventures of the early church. It's breathtaking. Some scholars think that Luke just wrote one book and that we have it in 2 parts. Some think that Theophilus was a specific person, and others think that Luke's work is addressed to anyone who is a friend of God. What most people do agree on, though, is that Luke wrote well, he wrote accurately, and he wrote with Jesus at the centre. Even in Acts, which begins with Jesus disappearing in a cloud, he is at the centre. We will look at part of the Acts passage again on Sunday, so I'd like to use today's sermon as an invitation. You see, this exciting book is written on 3 levels. The first, with which we are most familiar, is the telling of the story of the early church, how the Holy Spirit moved through the disciples of Jesus, and the church began as the people called out by God. Ecclesia, the Greek word for church, means exactly that, called out. Obviously, Luke only has time to tell selected stories, showing the spread of Christianity, the fellowship of believers, the leaders of the early church, and at times difficulties in their relationship, the good news of Jesus Christ, and the transformative power of the Holy Spirit. The second level on which Acts is written is that it is a book about Jesus. He is the principal actor. Events crucially depend on him, even though we hardly see him. This reminds me of C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. In The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, we see a lot of Aslan, the King of Narnia. But in the next episode, Prince Caspian, he appears a couple of times, but Aslan is the one who has authority. He is the one whom the children serve. And the third level is where our invitation lies. The Acts of the Apostles is like a play where we are invited to become actors ourselves. As the scene is set at the start of chapter 1, we see Jesus making promises to the disciples. In verses 4 and 5, he promises baptism with the Holy Spirit. In verse 8, he says they will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes, dunamis, from which we get the words dynamic and dynamite. And then, as he is taken up into a cloud before their eyes, we are left with them, looking up into the sky, wondering what we do next. The 2 men dressed in white, in verses 10 and 11, promise that Jesus will come back in the same way that they have seen him go into heaven. We've all done a lot of looking into the sky, scratching our heads, wondering what on earth is going on recently. One of the lovely things about the change of pace in our crazy world is that the sky is clearer, quieter, and a deeper blue. And this is where we need to hear the invitation of Jesus, to receive his Holy Spirit, so that we can be his witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth, Dingle, Liverpool, and the UK. It's interesting to note the difference here between the words authority and power in verses 7 and 8. The Father has authority, but we will receive power. And that is the call on our lives now, as friends of God, disciples of Jesus, to witness to those around us who have not yet received that invitation to become part of this adventure. God is in control, but he will empower us to witness to him by sending the Comforter, the Helper, the Advocate that we read about last Sunday. So if any of you thought that church was boring, please read some more of Acts. Read it with the resurrection of Jesus and the new life he brings fresh in your mind, looking up to the King of Kings. And read it in the presence and power of the Holy Spirit, knowing that we are each invited, Theophilus, to play a part in God's kingdom, in spreading the good news of Jesus, and in sharing the blessings of the Holy Spirit.